The very nice people at thewhiterose.uk have sent me issue number 4 of their Freedom magazine. And again, it's packed with very interesting and eye-opening articles. And if you want to get a copy yourself, I thoroughly recommend it. I'll leave the link in the description, of course. And interestingly, there's an article here called Life Without the Internet. Do you remember those days? Life without the internet? I mean, you have to be of a certain age, of course, to remember. And it is, in fact, sometimes quite difficult to cast your mind back to a time when the convenience of the internet was not really there. Although we didn't know that it was going to be a thing and that it could even be as convenient and as easy to send communications and things like the videos that we do, all of that. And funnily enough, I've been reading a book by A.G. Street, which is a farming story about a young man who becomes a farmer. And for one reason or another, he ends up having to go to the BBC to do a bit of talking about farming. And he meets up with a secretary there. And the whole process of them getting the script together was fascinating because it took me back to my formative years. And the secretary there, they needed 5 or 6 copies of this script, and it needed various amendments. And so the secretary took 5 or 6 pieces of carbon paper, put them between the pages of the white paper, and would type up on an old-fashioned typewriter, presumably quite hard, as the keys went flying up, and would type up the amendments and do the script. And each page was done, so the duplicate copies were done at the same time. And of course, any mistakes had to be corrected with some sort of white Tipex type thing, not only on the master front page copy, but on presumably all the other copies as well. You couldn't just go, oh, I've made a mistake, don't worry, I'll just print another version out and let the laser printer or the dotmetrics printer or whatever it is that we have these days, inkjet printer, to do it all. No, you had to go, oh, well, we'll make all the corrections. And then if there was major problems or a page needed to be inserted, the secretary's job was to type it all up. Those days, those old days where everything was analog, everything was driven by belts or diodes or transistors and things like that, not digital. It's quite fascinating. Clearly, back in those days, before you could be communicating on a phone, before you could be typing on a computer and all of that, before the internet really came along, life by default had to been slower. And the internet, of course, has sped things up, has made the sharing of information extremely quick and viable, I suppose. Back in the days before the internet, you can imagine, of course, children didn't have phones and computers, and so were not glued to all sorts of games or text messages or watching videos, and were not focusing their eyes only 8 inches from a screen. But they were actually more encouraged to get outside, breathe fresh air, enjoy the sunshine. In fact, days before the internet, of course, we had a lot more sunshine, it would seem. There were not so many, although I do understand that in recent years, of course, they were doing the spraying. We just didn't know about it. But now, of course, it seems to be here in July. It is a daily occurrence, and the weather being manipulated right down to the nth degree with all the technical technology that they have to be able to sort of pinpoint where they want the weather at any one time, probably there to cause a great global food shortage. Anyway, that is another issue. But the internet, of course, has provided us with the ability to share that information very quickly. Life before the internet clearly meant that information was a lot easier to control. You could control the newspapers and you could control the mainstream media a lot more. And of course, most people, unfortunately, are still taking their news from mainstream media. They've yet to twig that actually that is controlled media and propaganda and giving them an altered sense of reality. Whereas the internet, of course, has given a lot of people the freedom to perhaps use more common sense and critical thinking. These are skills that we need more than ever when discerning things that we read. The problem, of course, with the internet is that anybody can be a publisher, anybody can put up spurious stories. They may be true, they may be not true. And we then have to very much now rely more on our gut and decide what is likely to be true and what isn't. So not all things were great in the days before the internet because you could only take your news from certain sources. However, for me, it is that sort of sense of freedom that in order to find out stuff, you had to go to places, even if it was only the library, and hunt around in the basement, in the reference section for perhaps some of those older books, where you could get information that perhaps nobody ordinarily would search for. Now we're seeing with the internet, information is of course being rewritten. The digital format enables things to be rewritten very easily and very quickly so that we don't even notice it. A Wikipedia page that may at one time have actually based itself on some truth can now be quietly changed, as in old BBC articles can be quietly changed and manipulated so that when people search back, or any archive can of course digitally be removed, updated, slanted the way that people want it these days. Not so easy if you go into a second-hand bookshop, if you can find one, and find a very ancient book that has been published. Now the truth in there may be questionable depending on how much information at the time was known, but it cannot be changed. It was printed and that's where it is, hidden in those old vellum pages between leather-bound covers. And what a delight it is to find those sort of books and the thoughts that people had at the time. Life before the internet, one of the things to me that it calls to is that families were much closer together. The family unit was more important than anything else. Going to work was just a means of trying to earn some money for most people, and the family unit would gather around a table and talk to one another. They would talk of their day. Nature was important to people because you could rely on plants for health, you could rely on plants for growing vegetables, and your local amenities were all surrounding you. You didn't go online to large corporations and order things from across the world, from places like China or wherever. There wasn't the next day technology around that made everything just in time. Things were sourced from the local area. And I think that we are missing something, those that can remember life without the internet. Now, of course, I'm not suggesting for a moment that we all go back, because the internet has, of course, it is a double-edged sword. While we've all become very easy and reliant on it and said, oh, I don't need to double check anything anymore. I can just go online and find out the information. And AI, of course, is the big danger on that young people are being brought up to believe that whatever AI says must be true because it's in black and white and it's coming to you through the internet, and somehow that makes it true, just in the same way that in the old days before the internet, things you read in the newspaper again were black and white and therefore must be true. And we have to be careful absolutely what information we read, and again go back to our gut and say, is that true? The skills of critical thinking, is that really genuine? Where are the sources? Do I believe that? Do I believe the person telling me that information? Do I trust it? And can you trust AI? So I'm not suggesting that we have to have life without the internet, but as ever, it's that thing about throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's very easy to say that the analog world has gone and has nothing for us because we're in this super sexy world of screens and blue lights and EMFs and instant gratification, and anything you want you can download and access and stay in front of a screen and it's all fine. Stick on a virtual reality head and you can be in the countryside without actually having to sort of traipse out of the house down country lanes and get out into the beautiful countryside and smell the cows, etc. And yet actually the experience of physically taking your body into the countryside and actually smelling all the sweet, the flowers, the scents from the blossom, the dung of the countryside, it's all part of actually improving your life and connecting you with Mother Earth, which is something we should all do. So it's interesting, the article here, Life Without the Internet. It is very easy to look at it with rose-tinted glasses, I grant you. However, let's not just dismiss it as just simply fond memories from those of a certain generation. Let's think, actually, what would happen if the internet should break down, or there were power cuts, or for reasons that perhaps are not quite so kind, benevolent government wanted to restrict your access because perhaps you've said too many bad things on certain platforms, or were questioning the mainstream narrative. What would happen then if you could not access the internet in the way that we've become so used to? What would you do? Would you even understand how to go back to the analog ways? Perhaps sometimes things like the old CB radios or even walkie-talkies instead of mobile phones and WhatsApp groups and Telegram groups might be the answer. Finding different ways, even semaphore perhaps, might be a solution should the internet suddenly go down and we feel that we have no way of communicating or staying in connection with our friends. We may find that actually we get outside again and meet in the town halls, in the pubs, in public places, or dare I say in the countryside, and meet up in real space with real people and have real conversations. Those things that actually mean something. Whereas emails and WhatsApp messages and text messages, they fly out left, right and centre, but what do they really mean? There is nothing more important, I feel, than face-to-face, being in the company and the resonance with the vibrations of somebody in front of you. Whether you're scheming to take over some nasty kind of controlling government thing, or whether it's just there to have a pint and a laugh at the nonsense that's going on around you, or to rejoice and hug. Getting back and not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and reminding ourselves that actually there were some very good things connected to life with the internet, and it's finding the balance. But if the internet goes, maybe we should still retain some of those skills that we had in the past and that knowledge to help us so that we're not quite so impotent and able to be taken advantage of by perhaps certain forces that might like to do so. With luck, my voice will return and you will hear me in better glory than it is at the moment. Thank you for watching.